So how do they hear the answer?
Yeah. Well, we'll talk loud.
All right.
Thank you very much,
Let's
Chris.
just do a Q&A right now.
Yeah.
Makes
So,
sense.
well, so we'll do the
Chris,
first
love-
question. All right.
Love
So-
Space Oddity.
Thank
you. Awesome.
All right. So, what did living on the ISS teach you about what we need to know to live on the Moon or Mars?
Living on the moon or Mars means that that's available.
Yeah. Pick it up.
Means that you're away from the cradle of the Earth. Everything we take for granted, every single breath here, every drop of water, it's sort of for free. But as soon as you live away from this planet, on that one or that one, then those aren't free anymore. And so one of the biggest things we're learning on the space station is how do we wean ourselves from Mother Earth? How do we build and provide an environment that will allow people to live sort of the same as we do here, where you don't even think about your next breath or the fact that you need water to stay alive. And where's your food going to come from? I mean, there is zero food here and zero food here, and no air at all to breathe. So we're going to have to do all those things, just like the space station. There's no natural air to breathe and no natural food up there. So it's sort of like if you just went offshore here, maybe in San Francisco Bay, and sailed around the bay for a couple of years, learning how to build a spaceship so that then you could go under the Golden Gate and head out across the Pacific. The space station is sort of like sailing around the bay, proving all of our technology before we launch the 250,000 miles to that one or the 70 million miles to that one.
All right. Ready for the next one?
I'm always ready, sure.
All right. All right, here we go. So, I mean, I guess you kind of answered it, but so which planet of these would you most want to explore for yourself next?
Happily, I'd explore any of these three. I've explored this one some. I haven't been here yet. I've been here. I've walked on the cap of Greenland and up here on Ellesmere. I lived in Russia for a while, and I was in Australia 4 or 5 days ago. But so I've had a good look around this one, and I've been around it 2,650 times.
Yeah.
So this one I know pretty well. This one I've looked at almost every night. I was looking at it, the beautiful full moon, a couple days ago, and I've studied it some. I would love to go there, and it's only 3 days away. So I think we have a pretty good shot of putting people permanently there within the next couple decades. Really just a permanent habitation. So I would love to have a chance to do that, because I'm hoping to stay fairly healthy and active and busy doing things for the next couple decades. So maybe I'll have a chance to go live there. But the trouble with the moon is no atmosphere.
Yeah.
And water's pretty hard to get at. It's just at the North and the South Pole and buried fairly deep. So this one is more interesting, I think, because it has an atmosphere, even though it's thin, and it has basically unlimited water at both poles. So Mars is really interesting, but the trouble is Mars is 6 months away. That's only 3 days. So that's the difference between going from here to, I don't know, here to Napa, and going from here to, I don't know, somewhere South Africa, say. It's a huge difference in a rowboat.
Yeah,
so
in a rowboat.
This is hard to get to, and we got to invent a lot of things before we can easily go here. But there's a lot of smart people working on it.
Absolutely.
So I want to explore this one a little more. I'd love to go live there and explore it. The holy grail right now is this one, but it's hard to get to, even for a robot, let alone a human being. But hey, never say never.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right.
So if we have some time for questions?
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question for Chris?
Yes.
Which song are you going to do next from up there?
I play songs all the time. I write a lot of music. I tour with Bowie's band. I play with symphonies. I co-record and co-write with lots of other artists. I don't know, what's my next concert? I do one-man shows with concerts. When's my next concert? Oh, I played a really interesting concert in Vienna last month, or 6 weeks ago, with let's see, Brian May of Queen, and Hans Zimmer, and Rick Wakeman of Yes. Those are really good musicians,
That's
great
a
people to
lineup.
play with. So,
a great lineup.
so yeah, I play music all over the place. It's fun. Everyone should play music. Why wouldn't you?
We have a question in the back.
Yes, sir.
Go Mars Direct or Gateway?
If we tried to go Mars Direct, it's sort of like if you and I decided, let's go sailing in San Francisco Bay. And while we were, I don't know, on our little sailboat, we looked around and we went, hey, we've got sails, so we got propulsion. We got hats, so we've got environmental protection. And we've got snacks, so we got food. Let's go to Australia. You know, we have a transportation and basic gear, but we die on the way to Australia. And that's sort of where we are going to Mars right now. If we try to go to Mars right now, we'll all die. We don't know what we don't even know. We have to invent a lot of stuff first. And it takes a long time to invent and test things. And so it makes a lot more sense to practice nearer to home and test stuff. So if you get it wrong, you don't kill everybody. Because as soon as you fire your engines to go to Mars, you're committed for a year at least. You can't turn around. There's not enough fuel. And so stuff goes wrong in a year. I mean, I commanded the International Space Station. Stuff goes wrong every day. So it makes a lot more sense to do stuff here. And because it's only 3 days away. If we get it wrong, we can come home. We don't have to kill everybody every time. So the gateway's not perfect, but it's one way in order to test and prove and build the momentum necessary in order to be able to eventually go here. So I think we could go to Mars Direct. We'd kill everybody many, many times. So then you got to ask, why? Is it worth it, killing all those people? What's the purpose of it? You know, I think if it's just exploration for scientific purposes, then there's no big rush. And so I think we'll do it a little more gradually. You know, orbit the world for a generation or two like the space station is doing, and then orbit the moon and live on the moon for a generation or two until we figure that out. And then hopefully we'll have learned enough things to be able to cross the next big ocean and go as far as Mars. I think it's a logical progression.
Thank you. I think we had a question back here.
Yeah, real loud.
How do you guys figure out the dust and stuff on Mars?
How do we figure out what? Dust?
The dust?
So there's all sorts of problems to solve, whether you're living on Earth, but more so on Mars or Moon or Mars. So dust is a huge problem here because there's no weathering. And so it's not really dust, it's basically broken glass. So if you can imagine all of the dirt you ever walked in was just ground up glass. That's what the moon is like. So if you inhale the dust, you're inhaling powdered glass. It's just because there's never been any water and wind to round it off. So it's an extremely abrasive and corrosive type of dust. And it's a real problem to solve on the moon. Mars, the dust, because they have weather, it's not as bad. And because they have all the water and the carbon dioxide ice, and because Mars used to have water and an atmosphere, it's a lot less of a straight, direct threat. But then again, the atmosphere is really thin and there's dust on everything. I don't think the dust on Mars will be our biggest problem. Power generation, water purification, growing food, all of those things. And here's a fundamental question. Every single one of you was born on this planet, where we have 1 G, which makes this thing weigh this amount. But if I were on Mars and I threw it up, it would only weigh 38% as much. And if I were on the moon, it would only weigh, 1/6, 15% as much. We don't even know if we can have babies here. We don't know if the conception process works, and we don't know if an infant from inside their mother's womb and then through their development as an infant and a toddler, if 38% gravity is enough. And we sure don't know if 15% gravity is enough. The baby may be born such that they don't have a balance system, or their body doesn't develop properly. And maybe they could develop on the moon, but then they could probably never go to Mars because the gravity would be too heavy. And if you were born and raised on the moon, you could never come here because your body wouldn't have developed properly. But it may even be worse than that. It may be that it's impossible for a baby to develop properly on the moon, in which case we can never live there. We'll always have to send our women back to Earth to have children, and then the children have to grow up and develop until they're adults before they can grow here. We don't know the answer to that question yet, until we can harness gravity. But right now, we don't even know what causes gravity. It's like electricity before 1900. We didn't know what an electron was, and so we didn't understand how to harness electricity. Right now, we don't know what the fundamental subatomic particles that cause gravity are. We're not even sure if that's the right answer. But as soon as we figure that out, as soon as we can manipulate gravity, then we can go here maybe in a week. And we could put, like on Enterprise, we could have a starship, a spaceship where you can walk around. And if we could control gravity, then all of that changes. But right now, we're pretty primitive in how we get to space. The ways I got to space were pretty basic, you know, and we're going to look back 100 years from now and just go, what were we thinking? The space shuttle? What a crazy idea. You know? Like if you look at Orville and Wilbur Wright's plane, their thing that they built, the Wright Flyer in 1903, you look at it now and go, what a terrible design for an airplane. They put the tail on the front, you know, what were they thinking? But it was the best flying vehicle in history. And the shuttle, sort of the same thing. Space station, the same way. You go with what you got. So there's dust, but there's a lot of other problems too.
Right, you got a question right here.
Yes.
Okay, so I read that you were afraid of heights.
Read that I was afraid of heights. Everybody should be afraid of heights. Everybody should.
Yeah.
No, but go ahead. What's your question?
So how was your first experience flying into space, and what were you feeling? What was going through your mind?
Well, just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean you can't learn a way to deal with it. Like, do you know how to ride a bike? Did you know how to ride a bike when you were 2? No. So at some point, you learned how to ride a bike. When you learned to ride a bike, I bet initially you were kind of scared because you didn't know what you were doing. But somebody taught you, probably. Someone told you, they held the back of your bike until you learned how to control it, until eventually you got good enough at it that not only wasn't it scary anymore, but it was fun and exhilarating. You can go fast, and riding a bike is great. But the bicycle didn't change. The bicycle and the danger and the risk are exactly the same as when you were 2 years old, but you developed a set of skills so that you no longer need to be afraid. It's the same with heights. You should be afraid of heights. I'm 6 feet tall. Just falling from 6 feet will break my head on a hard surface. That kind of limits how tall human beings can be, is how far can you fall without killing yourself. If we were 20 feet tall, every time you fell down, you'd die. So heights should be respected. But as soon as you know for sure that you can't fall, like you on your bike, then you don't need to be afraid anymore. And so when you're on a spaceship, you cannot fall. If you let go of the spaceship, you just fly along with it. So then, even though you're high, if you can't fall, then you don't need to be afraid. It's like being in a building on the 20th story. If you're standing on the floor, you're okay. There's 2 stories below us right here. You know, I'm 20 feet above, but I'm not afraid because there's a floor underneath me. So there's a difference between danger and fear. And understanding the difference allows you to function and allows astronauts who are afraid of heights to fly in space.
Okay, one last question. This guy was going to ask it.
What is one of the coolest things you've done? I've seen you walk in space.
What's one of the coolest
test
things
pilot.
I've done? Yeah, so I was a test pilot. I was a downhill ski racer.
Yeah.
I've commanded the International Space Station. I've been around this world 10 times while I was outside on a spacewalk. Coolest thing I've done? I was in the delivery room when my wife gave birth to all 3 of our kids.
Been there.
For each of them. To me, that's one of the most amazing things ever. To watch a new life begin. That's pretty impressive. And I grew up on a farm, so I've watched it happen with sheep and cattle and things. but when it's your child, that's a pretty amazing thing.
What would it take for that to happen in space?
But I don't know. I've been pretty lucky. I would say the coolest personal experience is going out on a spacewalk. And some of you may have been at the talk I gave earlier, but while I was outside on a spacewalk, we were coming across, we came over Africa, and we're coming down across the Indian Ocean, and night fell just as we crossed the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia and Somalia, and it became night. And so we were, the sun's over there, so we were in the shadowed part of the world. And I knew we were going to cut south of Australia because we go 52 degrees south, and Australia's down about 30 or 35. So I knew we were going to cut down here, and I thought, I'll be able to see all the cities, Perth and Adelaide and Melbourne and Sydney and Hobart. And so I shut off the lights. We were coming in the dark south of Australia, but while I was down here, the southern lights were spreading. And while I was down here, our spaceship went through the southern lights while I was outside. And because I'd shut off my lights, I could see them. Because they're there in the day, you just don't see them. And so the southern lights were rippling around my body and pouring past our spaceship. All the colors of them. And normally you just see green and red because they're the predominant colors. But there's little traces of yellow and purple and blue as the other gases fluoresce. And that was the coolest moment of my life, surfing on the Aurora. Very cool. Yeah, fun.
She has one last question.
What's your question?
What made you want to start NASA like start?
What made me want to start being an astronaut? What's your name? Brandy? Mandy. Mandy asked me what made me start with NASA and want to be an astronaut. Mandy, how old are you?
11.
Mandy, when I was just turning 10, so 1 year younger than you, is when there was a guy named Mike going around this moon every 30 minutes, and a guy named Neil and another guy named Edwin undocked from Mike and came down and landed here in the Sea of Tranquility. And I was just turning 10 when they did that. And I thought, holy cow, we can do that? People can fly all the way from here, 240,000 miles, orbit the moon, and land on the moon? I said, I want to do that, if that's something that I can do. And so I started that night, July 20th. I started thinking, okay, I want to be an astronaut. What do I start changing about myself? What book should I read? What food should I eat? How should I take care of my body? What should I study? What skills should I learn to be a pilot? Because astronauts fly, All those things were inspired by those first 3 people going to the moon and by Neil and Buzz walking on the surface. And if every astronaut had been a woman, I might have thought, well, there's no way I could be an astronaut because all the astronauts are women. But they were all men, so for me it was easy to think, well, I could be an astronaut because I'm a man. But now, the most experienced astronaut in American history is a woman, Peggy Whitson. And women command the space station. There's a woman up there right now who's probably going to stay up almost a year. So I don't know what you're dreaming of, Mandy, but there are people out there doing stuff right now that is so cool you can barely believe it. And the real question is, what are you going to do to turn your 11-year-old Mandy self into your 21-year-old Mandy or your 31-year-old Mandy? What are you going to be then to get you a little closer to whatever it is that you're dreaming of being? All right?